On Radio 97, our resident lawyer Despina Priala of boutique law firm Priala Legal in Runaway Bay, with us each and every Thursday. She's here to offer her legal expertise by providing some general advice on the latest of hot topics. She has experience that spans more than a quarter of a century in areas such as property and commercial law. She also prepares wills as part of estate planning and litigation. And she's with us once again this Thursday morning. Hello, Despina.
Good morning, Wayne. Good morning, Brooke.
Good morning, Despina. So this morning, a very interesting double segment. We're going to unpack buying a business. So this really can affect anyone, a business big or small. There's so many complicated elements, leases, staff, licenses, GST, all that stuff. So Despina, you're going to give us your hot tips and what to be aware of before you go into this big business venture. So where do you want to start?
So I'd like to start with exactly nice intro what you've said.
Thanks.
So far. And we want to add to that quite a bit. And there is so much involved in buying a business, and there's so many things you need to know. Buying a business typically involves a variety of matters, and buyers can really get themselves into hot water if they don't have representation, or I should really say have experienced representation. Because when you buy a business, it's different to buying property, which we've talked about a lot on the show. And typically when you buy a business, you're not buying the land, you're just buying the business. And buying a business involves so many intricacies, quite different to buying property and land, that there are so many things that buyers will not be aware of. And you need to go to someone, a solicitor, who has done many, many business transactions, who is very experienced in what is involved. And when we go through some of these things in the double segment today, because there's so many things to cover, buyers will, I'm sure out there will go, oh yes, there are so many things I wasn't aware, I didn't know, I bought a business before, it didn't work out, we didn't find all these things out until afterwards. So there are so many things to go through.
All right. And of course, we are talking here about businesses of all sizes. So in other words, we're even talking about the corner fish and chip shop, or a hairdresser, or a lawn mowing business, all the way up to, medium size and larger businesses too.
And that's right. So we want to get that clear that what we're talking about today affects the every Australian person, because we're not just talking about large businesses, absolutely not. We're talking about buying any business, large or small, regardless of the value, the fish and chip shop around the corner, the coffee shop, the restaurant, or the lawn mowing business, or whatever it is that you're interested in. All of the things we'll talk about today, and all the principles and the things you do need to know when buying any business, all of it will be relevant regardless of the nature of the business. And the other thing that I want to say very quickly is that when you've gone before and you've used a law firm to help you buy, a property, a unit, a house, or land, whatever it is, and they shouldn't assume that those law firms know how to look after business purchases and sales, because it is a completely different area. So you always have to ask that question: have you done many business transactions? Do you know, or do you have experience in it? So really important questions to ask. But let's get into some of the things that you need to know, and these are things that typically follow any business transaction, as we said. So some of the things we want to talk about are, the first thing is, when you buy a business, as I said before, you're not buying land, so you will have to lease the premises. Sounds simple, yes, but when you're buying a business and you're looking at that lease, you've got to deal with the landlord, the owner of the premises. You've got to get a copy of the existing lease. You've got to have your solicitor review the lease. If the lease is coming up fairly soon for renewal, or it's due to expire. So maybe it's a new lease that you have to negotiate, as opposed to taking over the existing lease. Other things that your solicitor should be aware of with that lease, because the lease is very important for you, are things like incentives that may flow onto you. So there are lots of things to know about the lease. And if you're buying a business, you may have a lease that spans another 3 to 5 years. You're locked in with that landlord. You've got a commitment with the landlord, not just a commitment to get your business going and make it successful, but you've also then got a relationship with the landlord that'll start from the time you settle your business, and that could go on for the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So understanding that lease document is very critical. It's one of the first things that we do. Another good example with the lease is some of the leases, particularly in retail shop leases, have things like a marketing levy, a promotions levy.
Oh.
So, and that is on top of the rent and outgoings that you have to pay. So when you buy a business, you really should be looking at conducting a due diligence across the board and have your contract subject to that. And when you're doing a due diligence, that due diligence incorporates things like the lease. So you have time to review it. You know, what if the lease is very, very unsatisfactory? What if there's no real security with it? What if you can't even afford the rent, the outgoings, promotions levy, marketing levy, and maybe a whole range of other things that you've got to pay under that lease that you weren't aware of and that the vendor or owner of the business didn't tell you?
Totally. And that marketing side of things as well. So does that include signage? Things like that might be a part of the building, or?
So signage is another one. So you can't assume that signage is just allowed under the lease. Typically, the leases always say that the tenant has to go and get council approval for any signage. And then you've got to perhaps deal in a shopping centre, for example, to deal with the landlord, whether they'll let you have signage out the front. Maybe there's already an agreement in place. So the lease is very important.
Yeah.
It can include signage. So one of the first things that we would do is a due diligence investigation. The other thing, of course, in due diligence that you would want to look at are the figures. That's very important because when you're looking at buying a business, the business broker or the owner of the business will give you some figures. Now, there are figures and figures, right, when you're buying a business.
Yeah.
So have the owner or broker, have they given you figures such as BAS returns, the BAS statements, I should say? Have they given you tax returns? Have they given you profit and loss statements? Have they given you balance sheets? And have they given you all of those? Is it only for the last 12 months or for the last 2 to 3 years? And also remembering with COVID, if you're buying a business and you're looking at figures in the last 2 to 3 years, the figures might not be as accurate as perhaps what they were before COVID.
5 years ago, of course.
Play it that way. Yes, absolutely. You can't really get away with buying a business without an accountant being involved and having a look at your figures, because we're not accountants. So that's a really, really important step. Another issue, a big issue, is staff, employees. And it's hit the headlines in a number of different businesses recently about independent contractors versus employees and what's the difference. And if you're buying a business, very important to find out, for example, in your due diligence, who are the employees? How are they employed? Are they casuals? Are they permanent, part-time? Where are the employment contracts? Does the business have independent contractors? So really, really important. And your contract has got to cover things like, okay, well, the owner is going to be responsible for paying all the employees out, if that's the case, making sure all the superannuation is paid up to date as of settlement, because the last thing you want to do is buy a business. You take on the employees, so they transfer over with you, and then you find later on that the previous owner actually owed the employees a lot of unpaid wages, a lot of unpaid entitlements, employee entitlements, and superannuation.
Okay, so of course it's very important to have all of this written down, as you say.
100%. And your lawyer who is experienced in buying businesses will know this already. The other thing is GST. Now, it may seem logical that when you're buying a business that's operating, that you don't pay GST because you're buying it as a going concern, and that would be correct. So the business has to be open, has to be trading for it to be bought as a going concern. But what in those instances if you're buying a business that's actually closed? And that often happens. So a business has been operating for a while, but for whatever reason, the vendor has closed it and it's on the market. So that means that the business is not operating and trading, which means it can't be sold as a going concern, which means that really you will be paying GST on top of the purchase price you've negotiated, right? You've got to factor that into your budget. And it also means something else that people might not be aware of is that you actually pay stamp duty on not just your purchase of your business, but also if you have to pay GST, if it's a taxable supply because it's not a going concern, then you're actually paying stamp duty on the GST price.
On the GST price. Yeah, wow. So that could make a difference of, quite a few thousand.
Yeah, thousands, yep.
Oh,
Easy.
obviously the higher the price, the higher the more the GST and the more the stamp duty. So really something important to look out for.
And we'll continue this chat with Despina Priala from boutique law firm Priala Legal, discussing how to buy a business, what to remember, and how to get yourself out of any sticky situations, coming up on Talking Law just after this.